Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are. Really happy to have you here, and thank you so much for all the time and effort you put into your presentation and participating in the case competition. Um, so, just want to go over the agenda a little bit and just some housekeeping rules. So we'll spend about 10 to 15 minutes, probably less, on a little bit of intro and opening comments. And then we will give you about 25 minutes for presentation. I'll give you a 5-minute warning when it's coming up, and I'll put it in the chat. And then we'll spend about 20 minutes or whatever time is left on Q&A and feedback. And for the judges, try to refrain your feedback until the feedback session, because during the Q&A, you are in a role. You're whatever the role the team has asked you to play, whether it's a board of directors or shareholders. So maintain that role and provide the feedback in a later session. Okay, so we'll kind of start off with introduction. Please do not share your references to the school or any relationship. This is a blind competition. So for the judges, if you can share a little bit about yourself, what you do, and what you're looking forward to, that would be great for the team. In this part of the competition, you are taking on a fictional business identity and assigning a fictional business identity to the judges, so whatever you want us to be. Please make sure everyone knows who you are and who they are before you begin. You'll have 25 minutes to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all three counts. During this time, teams will not be interrupted. When you are finished, the judge will ask you questions for 10 to 15 minutes. During the Q&A, both you and judges stay in character. After the Q&A, the judges will give you feedback outside the role playing. Does that make sense? Everyone's good? Okay. Well, I'll start. My name is Nok Flynn. I am a corporate controller for a construction company that focuses on sustainability and improving the way we build in our environment. I am in Seattle. Okay, why don't we, next, William?
Hi, I'm William Schur, or Bill. I'm in Dallas, Texas at the moment, native from Southern California. I'm retired from two careers that ran parallel to one another. I was an Air Force officer and then stayed in the Air Force active reserve and became a pharmaceutical sales representative for a company based in Southern California. It was a really boutique pharma. So I'm retired now and still trying to learn and engage. So there you go.
My name is Tanya Parrish. I work in communications and politics, and I have experience with the energy space at the federal level and a little bit of transportation policy as well. So I was excited when I saw this topic come up.
Hi, I'm Brianna. I am a freshman accounting student. I'm also interested in seeing what I can do with accounting and looking into the energy industry.
My name is Taylor Schoolcraft. I'm a junior management major and I'm interested in consulting and a lot of different spheres within that, such as energy, communications, things like that.
Hi, my name is Carson Katzmar. I'm a sophomore marketing major and I'm also interested within the consulting world.
My name is David Rabelais. I'm a finance major and I'm interested in investment banking.
All right, team, let's get started. Go ahead.
Well, thank you everyone for hosting us today. We are Team Fission Impossible, and we will be discussing about the public perception of nuclear energy and also how to overcome barriers to sustainable growth. So to begin, my name is David Rabelais, and I'm a financial consultant.
I'm Brianna Grapeson, and I will be the strategic consultant. And thank you all for having the time to talk with Fission Impossible today. I'd like to introduce my other colleagues as well, Taylor and Carson. They're also here with us today. So when it comes to nuclear, disaster, what is one of the first things that Americans think of when they think of the word nuclear? Oftentimes, it's nuclear disasters. And the top three very disastrous nuclear accidents include Chernobyl, Fukushima, and 3 Mile Island. But if you look at the fatality statistics, you find something very interesting. For Chernobyl, among the 600 workers, only 30 were fatally injured. For Fukushima, when there was a big earthquake, there was only reported one fatality directly related to radioactive waste. And then for 3 Mile Island, there are 0 fatalities reported. Now, with these different disasters and the public perception of nuclear energy and atomic bombs dramatically changing over time, the investment into nuclear energy has dramatically declined over the past half a century. And today, with the rise of AI and the need for data centers, there is an increasing demand for energy. Currently, our capacity is at 9 terawatts, while over the next few years, it's expected to more than double to 12 terawatts. And there is this gap that arises of how will we meet these energy needs while having a sustainable and safe way to produce energy. And this is where nuclear energy comes in. But being among the top 3 safest and cleanest sources of energy that is listed here, it is sustainable source of energy production for future uses. However, what comes into as a roadblock is American opinion. Currently, only about 55% somewhat or strongly favor nuclear energy. And this becomes an issue when it comes to legal or social roadblocks in implementing nuclear energy policy and constructing these facilities. And so how do we enhance the public perception of nuclear energy? Looking at a scientific, logic-based solution, we look to nuclear waste management. So before we dive deep, what exactly is nuclear waste? Unlike the green goo depictions in The Simpsons, nuclear waste is actually small pellets of low enriched uranium that is seen into the image on the right that are then stacked into fuel rods that are then compressed together in the image on the left in dry casts to protect the environment from radioactive waste. And so today we are here with waste control specialists to talk about how we can expand current storage of low-level waste to include high-level waste. So waste control specialist is located in Andrews County, Texas, in West Texas, where it is suitable for waste management because there's low rainfall, semi-arid conditions. The geological structures of 600-foot thick red bed claystone protects the groundwater from any waste in the area, and the nearest residence is 3.5 miles to the west in New Mexico. Currently, Waste Control Specialist has contracts with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the United States Department of Energy in order to regulate the low-level waste, which accounts for 90% of the waste that comes from nuclear power plants. However, today we are looking at high-level waste that comes from nuclear power plants, which is 3% of nuclear waste and accounts for 95% of radioactivity. Now, among the nuclear sphere, there are 3 major proposed solutions that are ethical: recycling facilities, interim storage, and geological repository. Now, diving into the nuclear fuel cycle, these 3 solutions come into play. So first, the uranium is mined and then goes to the nuclear power plant. And then currently, nuclear waste is stored in interim storage facilities that are on the nuclear power plant sites. However, this causes concerns with rising cost and space as nuclear energy expands. And so the other 2 proposed solutions came to reprocessing facility and a deep repository, which is a closed and open fuel cycle. However, even if the fuel goes through the reprocessing facility, it comes back to the cycle and there is still radioactive waste that exists that needs to be permanently disposed somewhere. And this is where the geological repository is very important in permanent nuclear storage. And so diving deeper, On this solution analysis, I've also included ocean disposal and abandoned island because these were past ways that nuclear waste was managed and stored. However, these are very highly unethical in terms of in case of environmental damage with the ocean, and then abandoned island if there are native people or populations that come back to populate the area, or if the island sinks into the ocean. Also, there is high transportation cost with abandoned islands. So looking back to the interim storage, recycling, and geological repository, for interim storage, the issue comes in the financial aspect of losing space from increased storage above ground. Furthermore, there is also the ethical consideration of the local neighborhoods as nuclear waste is spread out across the country rather than in one central location. When it comes to recycling, the issue is that it is not economical compared to mining new uranium directly from the ground. Companies prefer to mine over building a recycling facility that'll cause huge expenses. So when facing current legal hurdles and current financial standards, a geological repository is by far the most ethical solution for long-term nuclear waste disposal. And America is not the first. There's also been in Finland with the Anakalu repository. It means a small cave, and the operations will begin next year in 2026. It is the world's first long-term disposal facility, and essentially how it works is the same process as currently on interim storage with encapsulation. That is essentially the dry cask where the nuclear waste is stored. Then it is placed in bedrock near the bottom so that it is in a stable location environmentally. And then there are protective barriers that are installed within these facilities deep underground to protect the groundwater from nuclear waste. And then finally sealing the repository so that the nuclear waste can decay for 100,000 years before it can be brought back into the environment, into the surface naturally. And so why is waste control specialist in a strategic location for nuclear waste management? This is because as the black dots denote nuclear power plants across the nation, West Texas remains a central location for where different nuclear waste can be brought safely transported into a central location. Furthermore, compared to previous proposed locations such as the Yucca Mountains and the current New Mexico Consolidated Interim Storage Facility, it has salt formations in the geological area that make it safer to store than in a dormant volcanic area with the Yucca Mountains. Furthermore, current infrastructure and waste management experience for waste control specialists with low-level waste translates into ways they can continue to work with the current regulatory frameworks that they have already worked with and contracts with the government in order to further their base with nuclear waste management. And then finally, economic incentives in how Texas is a pro-nuclear state. And one of the mantras of the nuclear industry is they create waste, but they create energy, but they're also responsible for the waste that they create. And that is part of the nuclear fuel cycle that nuclear energy engineers talk about. And so now I would like to delve deeper into the legal aspects with Carson, who will talk more.
Thank you, Brianna. I'm now going to talk about the legal and public perception issues facing high-level waste management within Andrews County, Texas. So Waste Control Specialist is currently in an ongoing legal battle with the state of Texas, which has now reached the U.S. Supreme Court. The main issue involves Waste Control Specialists with the NRC arguing against Texas over the legality of a high-level waste facility in Andrews County, Texas. To understand this case, it's important to look at congressional battles and legislation regarding high-level waste management within Andrews County. Starting in 2021, when the NRC issued a license to Interim Storage Partners, a joint venture involving waste control specialists, for a proposed storage facility for spent nuclear fuel. The federal licensing decision faced lots of opposition from Texas officials, leading to legal challenges that eventually reached the U.S. Supreme Court. In 2023, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit ruled that the NRC lacked the licensing to license such a facility. The NRC decided to appeal this decision in March of 2025, and the U.S. Supreme Court has been hearing arguments over this case. Now in 2025, we wait a decision, which is supposed to arrive within June of this year. And one of the biggest legal issues of this case is the low-level versus high-level waste, as well as above-ground versus underground storage. Waste control specialists already manages low-level waste below ground, taking advantage of the region's unique geological features. However, when waste control specialists proposed an above-ground high-level waste facility and was granted license by the NRC, that is when the legal battles really started to pick up. So diving more into these legal barriers, it's important to understand the state and federal hurdles that waste control specialists and the NRC have had to go through. For starters, the Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1982 designated the Yucca Mountains, Nevada as a primary deep geological repository for high-level waste management, which has made it difficult for an alternative location such as Andrews County to be selected. Furthermore, Texas passed House Bill 7, which prohibited state agencies from issuing permits for the disposal and storage of high-level waste, and just further highlights how Texas legislator intent is to prevent the state from becoming a repository for the nation's high-level nuclear waste. Lastly, it's important to understand the Atomic Energy Act of 1954, which created a federal law to permit the government to license private temporary nuclear waste facilities. And the issue here is that due to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling, the NRC does not have the authority to license a private company such as waste control specialists. And so how can waste control specialists and the NRC work to make it legal? For starters, they can begin lobbying for a federal policy change, starting with the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, which must be amended in order to allow alternatives to Yucca Mountains, such as Andrews County. Waste control specialists should also collaborate with the Texas lawmakers, industry leaders, and nuclear energy advocates to push for bipartisan legislative reforms. And then on the state level, they can focus on working to reverse House Bill 7, which banned the high-level waste disposal and restricted state agencies from issuing high-level waste facility permits. And they can also work with Texas legislator to propose a regulated high-level waste disposal framework, which will show the concern for the safety of Texas and help get approval on different legislature. And when it comes to legality, it's important to make sure the public perception of nuclear waste management is strong, as it will help waste control specialists gain political support. So different methods that you can conduct is to conduct transparent community outreach programs, which educate the public on safety, economic benefits, and environmental protections, as well as invite third-party scientific organizations or universities to conduct independent safety audits and then publish their findings. You can also prioritize hiring local citizens, which can incentivize the community to vote for nuclear waste facilities based on potential jobs. And you can provide public policy updates on safety audits to further build community trust. And then furthermore, one of the biggest concerns surrounding nuclear waste is regarding what it will do to local environments. To combat this concern, you can highlight how water, soil, and air quality are going to be monitored and protected. Lastly, when it comes to nuclear waste, one of the biggest emotions associated with it, as we discussed, is fear. That is why you, the board, can publicize plans for emergency responses and long-term waste containment in order to ease the fear associated with nuclear energy. Taking the time to ensure that the public perception of nuclear waste in Texas is strong will help waste control specialists and the NRC fight the legal battles challenging them and help ensure that a long-term facility in Andrews County can be built. So now I'm going to hand it over to Taylor, who's going to talk about the ethical portion of our topic.
Thank you, Carson. So now that we've explored the legal challenges of nuclear waste storage, we can shift our focus to the ethical side of this issue. Ethical responsibility requires us to consider long-term consequences, public trust, and fairness across multiple generations. So what is the ethical dilemma of nuclear waste storage? The first is long-term responsibility. Nuclear waste lasts far beyond our generation, and we don't want to burden future generations with our actions of today. Next are environmental concerns. So improper disposal can contaminate ecosystems for thousands of years. Next is health risk. So exposure to radiation can have severe consequences. And then overall, there is a lack of trust, as Carson discussed, in the nuclear energy, and many communities oppose nuclear projects due to their public perception. So to solve these issues, we need a sustainable, scientifically backed, and publicly accepted solution. So when we look at the stakeholders for this project, there are multiple, and I want to highlight the general public and local communities plus future generations, as those are who the ethical concerns are focused on. So Brianna touched on Finland's Onkalo repository system, and they have done a great job in gaining the public acceptance of nuclear energy over the past few years. So in 2023, they had a positive acceptance rate of 61% in acceptance and a negative of 9%. So how they did this was first using stepwise decision making, which is a gradual approval process through different governmental organizations, the local community, scientists, and regulatory bodies to ensure that there were no mistakes and the process was not rushed. Next was scientific assessment and just doing scientific studies to ensure there was a scientific grounds for this project. Then public engagement. So there was transparency and open communication with communities, which helped build trust. Next was regulatory oversight. And then finally, transparency. So Finland made its entire process of this project open to scrutiny. From the beginning, the government and nuclear agencies engaged directly with the public, holding open forums and Q&A sessions and consultations to address any concerns that the community might have. Waste control specialists can partner with governmental agencies and can use similar methods to achieve similar goals. Together, these approaches create a holistic framework to increase public trust in nuclear energy. So, following the collective opinion of the Radioactive Waste Management Committee of the Nuclear Agency, a ethical waste management system must balance two key aspects. One of those is intergenerational. Intergenerational equity ensures that future generations aren't left with dangerous waste. Next is intragenerational equity, which ensures that today's population does not suffer any undue risk. So this committee found this is the best way to assess the ethical basis of geological disposal of long-term radioactive waste. So it's exactly what our project is doing, and this is how they were able to measure that. And our approach prioritizes this framework to ensure responsible nuclear waste disposal. So when we're looking at these various solutions of nuclear waste disposal, we can see that the geological repository emphasizes both inter and intragenerational equity. The recycling facilities does this as well, but they are highly restrictive and do not have a legal basis within the US. When we look at interim storage, so the current solution in the US for nuclear waste, while it does prioritize current generations, it does not prioritize future generations. Ocean disposal and abandoned islands, again, are very unethical and harmful in both ways. When we're looking at the organization's mission, waste control specialists, they emphasize a safe, comprehensive, and compliant solution to nuclear waste while prioritizing environmental protection. Our solution ensures long-term security and safety and sustainable efforts. Now, regarding the SDGs, we can see that the goals that we are prioritizing, goals 7 and 12, so affordable and clean energy and responsible consumption and production. The United Nations Principle of Sustainable Development mandates that current generations protect future generations from nuclear waste hazards, and our solution prioritizes this. Now, David will discuss the financials.
Thanks, Taylor. So looking at the financials, it's important to understand what the other projects have been in terms of an underground repository. So we decided to analyze the ongoing projects and also past failed projects. So this graph shows the different projects according to countries, and also shows what year they were planning to complete, along with how much they cost and how much tons of nuclear waste they were expected to hold. So as we mentioned earlier, the Yucca Mound that failed back in 2011. That was a $96 billion project. $15 billion of it actually was spent on construction before it was defunded completely back in 2011, which meant that the US no longer has a long-term solution for the 88,000 metric tons of nuclear waste right now. Those are just in current temporary solutions. So the Finland repository we were talking about is expected to start operations next year, actually. And this will be the first ever long-term repository for high-level radioactive waste. And then Sweden and Canada are having plans of their own, but this will be completed in the 2030s and 2040s, so a while from now. So why should waste control specialists invest in an underground repository? So as we mentioned, the company already operates in Texas for low-level radioactive waste. So we think the WCS can really leverage this expertise in nuclear waste to enter the high-level waste market. And right now, there's no competition at all. After the Yucca Mountains was shut down in 2011, there's really been no solution in the US. So there's really a lot of space here for negotiating leverage, especially when a long-term storage is created. You can really charge whatever you want for the contract in order to store there. We understand that the company only has $34 million in annual revenue. A project is estimated to be $1 billion in costs, which takes about 5 years in construction. So the next slide shows the ROI of a project. So we did a discounted cash flow to see what the sustainability and also feasibility of a project. So let's assume you have $1 billion project that took 4 years to build. So you spread the cost over 4 years. And then after that, you earn about $150 million in profits moving forward for the next until it gets shut down. So if you discount this back at a 5% rate, you actually have a positive net present value, which tells you the project should be proceeded with, and also a 4% return on investment as well. However, the nuance here is due to the company's small size, the WCS wouldn't own 100% of the project. It would definitely need financial backing, whether it be from the federal government or other nuclear companies, or also like a company like Microsoft who have an interest in the space. So this is assuming a 20% cut, but the company could still make $40 million in net present value of returns. So to wrap it all up, to ensure public perception, we advise that WCS develop a geological repository in West Texas, just given its geographical nature and the trace needed to have such a repository. It's also important to ensure this intergenerational safety. At the end of the day, that's what a long-term underground storage does versus recycling it or just dumping on in the ocean somewhere. And as we mentioned, it's important to establish that public-private funding partnership in order to fund the project, given how costly it will be. And most importantly, it's important as well to look at around the globe to see what our peers are doing around the world, whether it be Finland, Sweden, or Canada, and also leverage their expertise and technology in order to build our own. And with that being said, we want to thank you for your time and open up to questions.
Thank you so much, team. I appreciate the wonderful presentation and would like to have a little bit more of an understanding from your perspective, and you can summarize at a high level. What makes this an ethical issue, and why is the company responsible for addressing that?
Yeah, I can cover this. So for nuclear waste storage, there is this ongoing issue of, okay, it lasts thousands of years. We do not have a current long-term solution. And if we do not create a long-term solution soon, it gets left to future generations that had no say in this issue. So it's really important for a company such as Waste Control Specialists to take a stand, and they have the facilities and capabilities to do a long-term solution like Finland, so the geological repository, and ensure that future generations are not left with this undue hardship that we created.
Thank you, Taylor. You said undue hardship for the future generation. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on what it is that is the ethics of the undue hardship?
Yeah. So for nuclear waste, obviously there is a potential for radiation exposure, contaminating environments, contaminating ecosystems, and like ocean dumping, we could just throw it in the ocean, we could put it on an abandoned island, but that is not ethical, as that could harm those future generations, giving them that hardship that they were not left with. So it's mainly about the health risk and protecting the environment as well, and being able to create a system that can effectively manage this waste for thousands and thousands of years for as long as it lasts, because it's not going anywhere. So we need to be able to create something that keeps it safe.
And to follow up to Tara's point, I think what's really good to understand here is this is your typical example of, let's say, a European city back in the day. Everyone just kind of threw trash everywhere. The rivers were polluted. The quality of life wasn't necessarily that great because there wasn't necessarily a specific solution to keep all the trash like we have in the modern day, especially in the US. You have these dumping grounds. And this is the same issue here. You just have these nuclear canisters all over the nation on site of these nuclear facilities because there's really nowhere else to dump it. It's like, if each household just kind of collects trash, in the backyard because there's no garbage truck to come around and pick it up. And I think what's really important to emphasize here is, like Tara mentioned, this is a problem that doesn't go away in 50 years. Like garbage, I guess, kind of becomes part of the environment in 10, 20 years. This is something that's around thousands of years. And it's the same issue why, climate change is kind of a big issue of some people as well, because it's just an issue that spans generations beyond what we will see to live. And I think that's kind of the big emphasis on ethics there.
Thank you so much. All right, let's open up questions to our board. Who would like to start?
I guess a question that comes up, and this might be a little bit more on the technical side, but were the alternatives to waste disposal explored, particularly ocean disposal? Because I'm not sure that would not be a viable alternative. So that's one aspect. The other one is recycling, because, for example, in France has very, very little nuclear waste because they recycle their used fuel. And so I was just, wondering if maybe that could have been explored a little bit, and if you all considered that.
So we did look into the recycling facility in France. Was one of our first examples of like, this is something that's feasible. And in fact, America did have a recycling facility. Taylor, could you pull up that slide in the appendix? We had one in New York. It was the West Valley Demonstration Project, and it produced high-level waste. In the end, the facility was shut down due to the enormous amount of waste that was coming outside of the recycling facility, because even if it goes through the facility, there's still waste that needs to be disposed somewhere. Yes, it produces less amount of nuclear waste, and yes, it's radioactive for a lower amount of time. However, there's still waste, high-level waste, that needs to be permanently stored somewhere, and that's why we went back to the permanent geological repository.
And also within the US, due to this project, there is currently no legal basis to continue doing recycling facilities with it, though it's highly regulated and it's not necessarily feasible legally as well and within the US.
Yeah, and to piggy off that, kind of the context why it's illegal in the US, we were actually kind of confused at first because we're like, France, a lot of their electricity is actually from nuclear, and they seem to do a pretty good job of managing their waste. But turns out the problem is nuclear weapons, because when you recycle the nuclear fuel, you actually refine it even more, which there's a big concern on misusing that, and some a wrong actor getting access to that and creating nuclear weapons on our domestic grounds, especially outside of the military context. So Jimmy Carter actually made it illegal for us to recycle nuclear waste in the US for that reason.
Just expanding, each time you recycle waste, a percentage of plutonium is also a byproduct of recycling nuclear waste, which goes into nuclear proliferation with weaponry.
So you said that there's no competition, and I'm wondering if that includes government entities such as DOE's national labs.
Sure, I can take that. So we looked at it from the commercial side of things. Just given, I guess, like the first thing we looked at was just kind of the administration backdrop and whether or not the Trump administration would be pro-nuclear or not, because I think that would probably be either a big headwind or a tailwind in terms of, making sure there's a long-term depository goes through and not get defunded back in 2011. And we decided to look at it from the commercial side, like for example, the nuclear players out there, the Cameco and the likes, like would they be interested in creating this like long-term depository? And I think the answer right now is no. At least from the research that we've looked into, I'm not sure about from like the government funded labs side of things. I'm sure there's maybe technology or plans that they have from that end, but we weren't too sure if that would be necessarily feasible in terms of funding.
Okay. Yes, because I was thinking more from the regulatory side, in terms of the permissions that are given to national labs, where I think in your summary you mentioned looking at a partnership. Um, so that's where my question was coming from.
Just out of curiosity, what legal barriers has Texas thrown up? if any? Is it this state? I live here, and it's very our consumption of renewables is probably the most in the country. And that's wind, solar, and we only have 2 nuclear sites. But I'm wondering if there's been any real pushback to nuclear from this local area.
Yes, so Abbott has actually given quite a big pushback on nuclear energy. We see that with the House Bill 7, which was passed in 2021. This restricted state agencies from issuing high-level waste facility permits. And so it was just kind of a bigger, it just kind of showcased that Texas and specifically Abbott is just has a big intent of not allowing this nuclear repository to continue.
Taylor, do you want to pull up the slide with the legal back to Carson's slide? Because there's also Texas is currently the one in the Supreme Court with waste control specialist with due to not wanting to be responsible for the nuclear waste that is produced in the state.
There's this idea of a not in my backyard, as in there's this push for nuclear energy, but it's this idea of, well, I don't want it where I'm at. So that's kind of like one of the barriers that the public perception side of our project is working to overcome.
Would you mind going back to your financial slide? Believe you had the NPV calculated. Okay, yes. So $1 billion in construction costs over 5 years. That's a pretty substantial amount of money that we would have to ask our shareholders to approve. And I'm curious, given that this is revolving around ethical concerns, and correct me if I'm wrong, does more ethical consideration than it is financial and performance metrics? If so, what's the argument for our shareholders? How are we going to convince them that this is worth the investment?
Wait, sorry, can you repeat the last part? Convincing a shareholder because it's a big project?
Yeah, $1 billion commitment over 4 years. That's a pretty big dollar amount to commit to, and this is in hope that, by 2029 that you'll be able to turn around a profit. So there's a lot of uncertainties over the next 4 years. How do we go about convincing that this is worth the investment beyond the NPV?
Right. I think the NPV is just a small part of it because obviously like there's a huge qualitative side as well because I think what's important here is when looking at WCS, you have a wide array of options you can pursue, whether you can double down on your current low level waste business that you're already in and kind of have a niche out for yourself or just expand to this high level waste opportunity. And I think it ultimately comes down into just whether or not we can forecast the profit you can make. Because what's like I said, like there's really no project right now in the US that are in the plans or under construction for a long-term deposit. So this would just be the first ever in the space. And obviously there's reasons why, like there's multiple legal challenges and whatnot. But I think really just like WCS has that nuclear expertise and that background in low level waste. And I believe that the jump to high level waste wouldn't be that huge necessary. So we can really take advantage of like the current employees that WCS has.
Remind me again, who's the main customer for this?
It would be any nuclear generators out there that currently have the spent nuclear waste that's just sitting on like the dry cast on their facilities. So there was about, I believe, like 77. I haven't one slide, but 77 generators around the nation.
Do you feel
Why now? I guess just to build on this idea. I mean, wouldn't it be easier to convince the board after we've seen a little bit of how Finland goes and how the current court case works out?
Yeah, I think the timing of it is definitely something we consider as well. And that we didn't include in the slide necessarily, but it kind of goes to the backdrop of what's going on right now in terms of the data centers. So for the past couple of years, obviously like AI has been a huge thing, but then kind of the upstream of AI is you need like these data centers in order to host the GPUs and whatnot. Like I'm not an AI expert necessarily, but I understand that there is a huge data center demand. And with the huge data center demand, you can build all these data centers, but if you don't have the electrical output needed to power them, like the data centers aren't, gonna work. And the kind of the issue with the electrical grid right now is it's actually not capable of meeting all of the data centers that are popping up around the nation. So you have like Virginia, like your data center valleys, like these data centers are popping up at a very fast speed compared to, the past 5-10 years. But the grid is just kind of overworked. And that forced companies like Microsoft, for example, to kind of move into like creating their own nuclear facilities next to their data centers. So I'm sure you guys probably heard of the SMRs, or the small modular reactors. So it's essentially like these big nuclear reactors of the past, but you scale it down to a lot smaller size. So you can just put it right next to a data center, and instead of powering a city, it just powers the data center. So I don't think AI is going to be a trend that goes away anytime soon, especially from what I've seen in my personal life and also from the research as well in terms of like the data center demand. So there's definitely a big tailwind in terms of the nuclear industry. And I think a kind of downstream of that tailwind is a lot of waste will be created over the next couple of years. And once again, like there's no long-term solution to deal with that waste. So this is a really great opportunity to enter into it.
So is your understanding that when Microsoft has their small module reactor, they don't have a plan they need to present of how they're going to dispose of the waste that is created?
I think it's
Or
just
are they doing that?
I think it's just same thing of like just kicking the can down the road mentality. Is like, hey, like we can have these dry casts to store the waste temporary on site next to these nuclear reactors, and it'll last you a couple of decades. Like it won't be like 1 or 2 years. But like I said, like it's not a long term, nor is it a sustainable solution. Like one day down the road, you can't kick the can any longer, and you have to put it somewhere else.
Why would we want to be the first to go after this if there are so many risks and uncertainties and challenges? Why would we not want to see other go first and see what kind of mistakes they'll make and learn from that?
So I think this is actually a really great opportunity given that the Finland repository is actually planned to go online next year. So most of the construction is actually finished, and they're already started putting empty canisters within the facility, just kind of test to see like whether it would, I guess, do its job of concealing all the radiation. And I think just given, let's say, assume it goes out, like it's on plan to go online next year. So you have a full year of kind of seeing how the Finland repository operates. I assume it would be good since this was actually a project that started back in 1983 and they had a couple of delays and whatnot. So I think right now you have like the next year to see how that operates. And also you kind of take advantage of that first mover advantage because right now, like no one's really looking into this solution necessarily. I think the Yucca Mountain getting defunded completely in 2011 kind of left a bad taste in most people's mouth. So they just ever since then just kind of rely on a temporary storage. So I think this is a really great opportunity to kind of be first mover in a space. And I think what comes with that is a lot of risk, I agree. But then you also have a lot of negotiating leverage in terms of, when you go to these nuclear reactors, you are the only long-term solution that they can store at. So you can essentially charge whatever price you want.
And I also want to emphasize location again of Andrews County, Texas, and waste control specialists. Let me go back to the map for that. Waste control specialist is uniquely positioned to have a facility like that. The infrastructure that it took to build in Finland is similar to what is in West Texas currently. And again, it is in the middle of nowhere, which does help the ethical side of it. It's not interfering with the population. And since it is all underground, again, it kind of just emphasizes that it's not really interfering with the livelihood of those around it that are miles away. But the Yucca Mountains had difficulties when it came to native populations in the area, and it had an unethical basis to it, which is a part of the reason why it was not completed.
I'm kind of curious about what kind of framework you have for educating the public, especially that part of Texas is a lot of a flat earther type mentality. How are you going to, I'm not really, I don't have a lot of warm and fuzzies about how you're going to get people, especially in a day and age where there's so much conspiracy and there's so much fake news and fake narratives, how are you going to overcome that with those people in that region?
Yeah, so if we look at Finland did, obviously the US is different from Finland, especially West Texas. So we kind of modified what they did. So the stepwise decision making, scientific assessment, and then overall we're really emphasizing transparency. And we analyzed the cultural dimensions of the US compared to go back to the slide, compared to Finland. And if we look at this, we can see there are similarities. So, but the one thing I want to point out is the individualism of the US. This is highly concentrated in Texas as well in West Texas. And this just means that the US might need a more personalized incentive, so economic benefits and autonomy to gain public support. Finland, in the town that their repository is located in, they gave a lot of economic benefits to the town. So they pay a lot of taxes. They're very incentivized of hiring locally, which is something that waste control specialists can definitely do and support that local community as well, since we are a more individualistic society in the US.
Another point, when it comes to beyond just the building the nuclear repository, there's also the nuclear facilities. And I was talking with the nuclear engineer. She works at the Comanche Peak Power Plant in Somerville County, Texas, so close to Dallas. And she was talking about in that area, Glen Rose was one of the poorest cities in Texas. And through building the nuclear power plant, they have completely transformed the economic landscape of the county and the city. And one other thing she pointed out, like, I was asking her, like, how did public perception, like, how did that change over time? And it honestly came down to talking with the regulations back then were different from the regulations today. Back then, they were more like, okay, we're going to build it here and we're going to make it. And that was the other part of building nuclear, the different part of like the different time span of when nuclear energy or like the power plants were built. But another point is bringing up these experiences of people like living near these power plants that are actually generating the nuclear energy versus people living near the radioactive waste that are safely guarded. And it's essentially like showing them the impacts with people and like bringing more awareness to these, bringing more exposure to the people and experiences of people who live near power plants and letting them know like what are the effects and really going in and focusing on community engagement and seeing how to essentially, I know there's like people are like focused on conspiracy theories, it's going to be harder to change their mind, but like in a way, like present the facts and present the stories and the people and the experiences and see how that changes their mind, as well as the economic incentives that come to the area.
Would the workers stay on location? Would this be a shift worker? Have you looked at that? Would it be 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, or are there enough workers close enough by that they could get to their job every day when this would be up and running?
The closest residence is 3.5 miles away, and so from there they can reach the location.
And those are fairly affordable housing? Or is it like, is it middle income or?
I believe it's around middle income, but I would need to check.
And we'll do one or two more questions and then we'll head into feedback. Last question I have is, what long-term generational challenges do you see beyond the periods where you identified would be relevant for the NPV? Because ultimately, there's going to be periods that are impacted beyond the time frame you have in there.
Sorry, are you to follow up, are you saying like when it gets decommissioned down the road, or once again, I want to clarify for the question.
Yeah. So we're saying there's an ethical consideration in this, and your solution is to address those ethical consideration at the same time, any financial and performance metrics, right? So you have up on here an NPV period, but some of the solution might expand on beyond that, where future generation might be impacted by the decision you're making with this. What kind of challenges you see them coming across that might not be on here that we haven't thought about?
I think one thing that comes into mind is it like there's some sort of leakage. So that's kind of like a black or what's the word like a left tail event or like a black swan event. You don't really, I guess, account for that necessarily. That's like a low probability event. So if that was the case, like if we were to build the first ever or functioning repository in the US and it was to malfunction down the road, I think that would once again like leave a really bad taste in people's mouth, and perhaps they are even more anti-nuclear than the people today are, and also just like anti-storing it in long term in these storage underground. And then I guess another kind of risks the most of the risks I can think of in the long term are just kind of like low probability risk that comes with like the storage of itself, because this is kind of like the solution in and of itself is kind of like burying it, right? Like you bury it and you kind of forget it, and just like hopefully it never spills into like the water table or anything like that. So the most of the risk would probably just be like if that wasn't the case and it did affect the environment somehow when it shouldn't have.
And going off of that, so the current storage system, it is meant to be temporary. It was never meant to be a long-term solution. So the interim on-site storage of nuclear waste currently, there has to be something to hold it for a long period of time. And currently with like regulation and just the previous examples within Finland and then within the US, it seems as though the deep geological repository is the most viable solution and emphasizes that this is intra-generational, so it will not hurt other generations.
Thank you. All right, so we are done with the Q&A session. I would like to welcome the judges to provide feedback to the team. And yeah, why don't we start with Tanya?
Thank you. Yeah, I think this is a complex topic to outline in a short amount of time. So with that in mind, I thought you guys did a good job, especially distinguishing between the nuclear energy versus nuclear waste. In the Q&A section, I thought the AI argument was really strong, and I may have missed that in the actual presentation portion. Very possible, because I had an issue on my end with my note taking, but I thought that was one of the stronger arguments I heard in terms of why now and why this would make sense.
Thank you. And Bill?
I was just really bowled over with each one of your individual amount of expertise in your area. This is a very, very complex topic, and it encompasses a lot of politics, and it's a highly technical subject, and it's controversial. But I think that your presentation skills were very clear, your communication was clear, and I thought it was very convincing. The only area that I think was kind of rushed was just from the financial dimension. There could have been a little bit more time to kind of cover that. So maybe in the organization of the presentation to allocate a little bit more time for that. The intro, I think, was a good lead-in. Brianna gave a really good, I think, overview of the nuclear industry and kind of the history, but maybe pare it back so that there's a little bit more room for a little bit more time for detail on the financial dimension. But that's kind of the way I see it.
Thank you so much. I echo what the judges said. I think that you are all very well prepared and you've done your research and you do know this topic very well. I personally have learned a lot from your presentation. Again, kind of echoing what Bill said, is a little bit more on the financial. The NPV is a good start, but I'm thinking from a board perspective, I'm thinking long term. So beyond the NPV period, what does this mean for the future generation of the company and so forth, right? I think the other challenge that you'll run into, and I think we highlighted this, is how do you convince locals that this is worth it? Because at the end of the day, you're trying to go after this from an ethical perspective, and some people do not want this in their backyard, or they want to not pay for this or have anything to do with this. So changing that heart and mind is going to be a little bit of a challenge. And then lastly, there are major sites happening right now where there are a lot of leakages, right? So the Hanford site, as an example, in Washington, that project is going on and off, and it's very expensive, and it was designed to intentionally be bury and forget, but now it's leaking, so there's a lot of ramifications to it. And what do people do? It's highly toxic material. So digging in a little bit more of what existing issue today at the site and comparing it to yours and developing your argument to make sure that you're addressing that statement, that assertion you said, well, if we plan it all right now, there shouldn't be any. Well, that's great, but there's always a probability that there will be. So making sure that you're addressing both in advance. All right, well, any last comments by the judges?
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, you really all answered each question very well. So just to echo what the other judges said in terms of preparedness, yes, you clearly know the topic and this project.
Texas would jump all over it, I think. They don't care how much drilling they do out there. They want the business. And maybe the radiation would kill off the measles that's going on in that very area. Just saying, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna add to Bill, your question earlier about just like whether Texans would support it. What's actually interesting is like I guess when it comes to the traditional form of energy, you think like solar and wind. So you explain like the political spectrum, like for Democrats and Republicans. Like obviously it makes sense that Republicans are more in support of like fracking and oil and gas and whatnot. But what's also interesting as well is like Republicans are more in support of nuclear energy than Democrat Party is. And I thought it would be the other way around, given like the Democrat Party is in support of like solar and wind as well. So I just thought that was a very interesting point that we found along the way.
Yeah, I mean, listen, they're building an AI center in Abilene right now, not to get sidetracked, and I'll shut up. But I mean, this is a state that gets very, very hot. We use a lot of energy. They just need more of everything.
Right.
Solar, all of it. And that's why it's being built like it is. On top of the demands that AI will place on it.
Well, I am definitely engaged, and I feel like I need another hour with you all to have a conversation. So thank you so much for your time and such a well put together presentation. And we wish you all the best of luck and great job. Now you can take a break and maybe grab some sunshine wherever you are.